The air in the courtroom was thick with the smug perfume of my mother-in-law's victory. From my seat at the defendant's table, I could see the back of her perfectly coiffed head, tilted at a slight, regal angle. She hadn't looked at me once. None of them had. My husband Tristan sat beside her, a beautiful, broken marionette in a suit, his strings held tightly in his mother's hand. He kept his gaze fixed on the polished wood of the witness stand, his jaw tight. He was the image of a betrayed husband, a role he had rehearsed well. Ms. Alara Devereaux, the prosecuting attorney said, his voice dripping with theatrical gravitas, did not marry into one of this nation's most venerable families for love. She married for access. She was a fox in the henhouse, and when she thought no one was looking, she did what foxes do. She stole. He gestured toward the evidence table, where the winter diamonds lay glittering under the harsh courtroom lights, a necklace and earring set, commissioned by Tristan's great-grandmother, a priceless piece of our family's history, he'd called it, our family. I almost smiled. They accused me of stealing them from the family vault on the night of my second wedding anniversary. They claimed I had been planning to sell them, to flee the country, and a marriage I had only entered under false pretenses. They had built a neat, plausible cage of lies around me, and my husband had willingly locked the door. My own lawyer, a quiet, ferociously intelligent man named Julian Vance, sat beside me, his hands steepled. He wasn't looking at the prosecutor, he was looking at the clock, as the prosecutor continued his opening statement, painting me as a conniving gold digger. My mind drifted back to that night, the night the world I knew had ended, and the war had begun. It had been an anniversary dinner at the Devereaux estate, a cold, formal affair. My father-in-law Alistair had spoken about market fluctuations. My mother-in-law Genevieve had critiqued the floral arrangements. My sister-in-law Isabel had spent the entire evening making thinly veiled remarks about my humble origins. Tristan had just sipped his wine and said nothing. Later that night, the screaming started. Isabel, claiming she had gone to the vault to admire the diamonds before a charity gala. She'd found the case empty. Genevieve had clutched her heart. Alistair's face had turned to thunder. They had immediately, instinctively, turned on me, the outsider. "This is absurd," I had said, my voice shaking. "Why would I do that?" "Perhaps you felt your allowance wasn't sufficient," Genevieve had suggested, her voice like ice. "The search of our wing of the house was a violation." Isabel, her eyes glittering with malicious triumph, was the one who found them, a single diamond earring, tucked away in the pocket of my trench coat. Planted, of course, a piece of stagecraft so clumsy I would have laughed if I wasn't so terrified. I looked at Tristan, my husband. I pleaded with him, with my eyes, to see the truth, to defend me. He looked at my face, then at the tearful, accusing faces of his mother and sister, and in that moment, he made his choice. "How could you, Alara?" he had whispered, his voice full of a sorrow so perfectly performed it must have been a relief for him to finally let it out. He didn't believe them, not really, but believing them was easier. It was easier than fighting them, and my husband had never done a difficult thing in his pampered, privileged life. That was the moment my heart broke, and it was the moment my mind went cold. As they called the police, as I was subjected to the quiet humiliation of being questioned, in my own home, I wasn't thinking about the diamonds or the prison sentence. I was thinking about the source of their power, their arrogance, their absolute certainty that they could crush me and face no consequences. And I realized it wasn't the jewels. It was the bank. Devereaux and Sterling Trust. The financial institution their family had controlled for 3 generations. It was the bedrock of their name, their influence, their very identity. They thought I was a threat to their family heirlooms. They had no idea I was about to become a threat to their dynasty. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor was winding down, and we will prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this woman, Hilaire Devereaux, is a thief, a liar, and a stain on the honor of the family that so graciously welcomed her. He sat down. A murmur went through the courtroom. It looked bad. It was supposed to look bad. Julian gave my hand a brief, reassuring squeeze under the table. I remained impassive, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutral calm. They didn't know who I was. Before I met Tristan, I wasn't a socialite. I was a senior analyst at a fintech firm in Singapore. I specialized in forensic accounting and hostile acquisitions. They had never bothered to ask about my career. It was of no interest to them. They also didn't know that 6 months before my wedding, a great aunt I'd met only twice had passed. away, leaving me a portfolio of tech stocks so substantial it dwarfed their old money fortune. I had never touched it. I had never told a soul. I had kept it as a secret shield against a world I knew was treacherous. I never imagined it would become my sword. After Tristan's betrayal, I had made a single call to Julian Vance, not just a defense attorney, but the sharpest corporate lawyer in the country. My instructions were simple. I didn't just want to be acquitted. I wanted to dismantle them. For 18 months, while they were building their pathetic case against me, we were quietly, ruthlessly buying their world out from under them. Alistair Devereux, for all his bluster, was a terrible banker. He was over-leveraged, had made risky loans, and had left the bank vulnerable. Through a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore holding companies, we bought up the bank's debt. We acquired minority shares through proxies. We bled him dry, and he never even saw the wound. The trial proceeded. The prosecution called Isabel to the stand. She wept crocodile tears as she recounted her horrified discovery. She was a terrible actress, but the jury seemed to be eating it up. It was in the middle of her cross-examination while Julian was calmly poking holes in her timeline that the interruption occurred. A side door to the courtroom opened, and a clerk hurried in, looking flustered. He approached the bench and handed a thick, sealed envelope to the judge. The judge, a stern-faced man named Reyes, looked annoyed. "What is the meaning of this?" "It's from the National Banking Commission, Your Honor," the clerk whispered, loud enough for the court stenographer to hear. "It was delivered by a federal courier. They said it was a matter of immediate public record." Judge Reyes stared at the envelope. He sighed, then took a letter opener and slid it open. He pulled out a multi-page document and began to read. His expression shifted from annoyance to bafflement, then to utter disbelief. The courtroom was silent, watching him. I glanced at the Devereux family. Alistair looked irritated by the delay. Genevieve looked bored. Tristan was just staring at the floor. None of them had any idea their world was ending. "Well," the judge said finally, looking up from the papers, his eyes wide. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is highly irregular. However, the document is legally binding and requires a public reading in a court of record at the earliest possible opportunity, which, it seems, is now." He took a sip of water. "This is an official notice of transfer of ownership for Devereux and Sterling Trust," he began. Alistair sat bolt upright. Genevieve's head snapped up. The judge continued reading, his voice a monotone that belied the explosive content. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, a majority stake of 68% of all voting shares has been consolidated from the following entities: the Caspian Group, Apex Holdings International, and the Rosewater Trust." He read through the list of shell corporations my team had so carefully constructed. "These entities," the judge went on, looking more stunned by the second, "have been dissolved, their holdings absorbed by a single parent corporation. The commission has vetted the transfer, and it is ironclad." He paused, looking down at the final page. He looked out over the courtroom, his eyes eventually landing on me, pursuant to SEC regulations. He read, his voice now filled with a strange sense of awe. "The final notice of ownership was filed at 9:01 a.m. The sole proprietor and newly appointed chairman of the board for Devereux and Sterling Trust is Ms. Ilara Croft Devereux." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. The prosecutor stood with his mouth slightly open. Isabel, on the witness stand, looked utterly lost. Then I looked at them, my family. Genevieve's mask of icy composure finally cracked, her face a mess of confusion and horror. Isabel looked like she had been slapped. Alistair looked like he had seen a ghost. His face, normally ruddy with self-satisfaction, was the color of ash. He was staring at me, true comprehension dawning in his eyes for the very first time. He was a king who had just learned that the peasant girl in the dungeon owned his castle, his army, and the ground beneath his feet. And Tristan, he finally looked at me, not at my hands, not at the floor, but directly into my eyes. The confusion, the betrayal, the fear, it was all there, but underneath it was something new, a terrifying, dawning respect. He was finally seeing the woman he had married, the woman he had thrown away. I met his gaze. I felt no triumph. I felt no joy. I felt nothing but the cold, clean satisfaction of a perfectly executed equation. I gave him a small, slow nod, a final act of dismissal. They had accused me of stealing. their family jewels. So I had taken their family crown. The judge's final word, Devereaux, hung in the air. A name that now belonged to me in a way my marriage license had never truly allowed. The silence that followed was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered every other sound. For a heartbeat, the entire courtroom seemed to be made of stone. Then Alistair Devereaux, the patriarch, the titan of industry, the man who had dismissed me with a wave of his hand for 2 years, broke. He surged to his feet, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, his jowls trembling. "This is an outrage," he bellowed, his voice, accustomed to commanding boardrooms, echoing off the wooden walls. "A fabrication. It's fraud. My lawyers will, Mr. Devereaux, you will be silent, or I will have you removed for contempt." Judge Reyes slammed his gavel, the sharp crack, a pathetic counterpoint to the thunder of a dynasty collapsing. The judge looked from Alistair's enraged face to my calm one, a dawning understanding in his eyes. He was no longer presiding over a simple theft trial. He was a witness to a corporate execution. The prosecutor, a man who had, minutes before, been pontificating about my moral failings, now looked like a befuddled fish, his mouth opening and closing as he shuffled papers that had been rendered utterly meaningless. My lawyer, Julian Vance, rose with the serene calm of a man who knew the game was already over. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension, "it appears the prosecution's entire theory of motive that my client, a woman of no means, sought to steal from her wealthy in-laws, has been proven to be, in the most charitable terms, fundamentally flawed." He paused, letting the weight of the understatement settle. "Given that the very premise of their case has been demonstrably refuted, we move for an immediate and full dismissal of all charges against my client." The judge looked at the sputtering prosecutor, then at the apoplectic Devereaux family. His decision was swift. "The foundation of the prosecution's case has been irrevocably compromised," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. "This case is dismissed." The gavel fell again. I was free. But I wasn't finished. I leaned over and whispered a final instruction to Julian. He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips, as the Devereaux were still reeling, a chaos of frantic whispers and horrified looks. Julian stood one last time. "Your Honor, forgive the imposition," he said, "but my client has one final piece of business to attend to, in her new capacity, as chairman of the board of Devereaux and Sterling Trust." The title, spoken aloud in this room, was a fresh shock. He walked calmly over to the front row and, one by one, served Alistair, Genevieve, and Isabel with crisp, heavy envelopes. "Tristan," he ignored completely. "What is this?" Alistair snarled, ripping his open. "That, Mr. Devereaux," Julian said, his voice projecting for the entire court to hear, "is a formal notice of an emergency board meeting, to be held at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The sole agenda item is the summary dismissal of the bank's current executive officers and the dissolution of the current board of directors. Your services are no longer required." The controlled chaos of the courtroom spilled out into the marble hallway. I walked through the parting crowd, a ghost they were all now terrified of. The Devereaux, their faces a ruin of shattered pride, followed me, their footsteps echoing with desperation. Genevieve was the first to reach me, her manicured fingers grabbing my arm. The icy composure was gone, replaced by a frantic, haggard fury. "You little snake," she hissed, her voice trembling. "How did you do this? What have you done?" I pulled my arm from her grasp, my gaze cold. "I did nothing you didn't teach me, Genevieve. I simply learned the value of a controlling interest." Alistair pushed his way forward, his face mottled with rage. "You think you've won. I'll bury you in litigation. I will drag your name through every gutter in this country." "Your name, you mean," I corrected him softly. "And with whose money will you be paying your lawyers, Alistair?" "Mine." He recoiled as if I had struck him. Then, finally, there was Tristan, my husband. He approached me, his handsome face a tragic mask of confusion. "Ilara talked to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I don't understand any of this. We can fix it. Whatever it is, we can fix it." I finally looked at him, and I let him see the vast, empty space in my eyes where my love for him had once lived. "There is nothing to fix. Tristan," I said, my voice quiet and final. "A choice was made that night in the library. You chose your family. You chose their lie. All I did was choose to accept your decision." I paused, letting the words sink in. A security detail will be at the bank's headquarters in the morning to escort you and your family off the premises. Please, ensure your personal effects are cleared out by noon. I turned my back on him, on all of them, and walked toward the courthouse steps, leaving them standing in the ruins of the world they had built. A sleek, black car I had never seen before was waiting for me at the curb. As I got in, the world outside the tinted windows seemed to go silent. My revenge was complete. I had taken their power, their name, their future, and all I felt was the quiet, hollow echo of victory. The car moved silently through the city traffic, taking me to my new life. I arrived at the city's most exclusive hotel, the one that housed the Devereaux and Sterling corporate offices in its adjoining tower. My new command center. Julian was waiting for me in the penthouse suite, a vast, empty space with panoramic views of the city. A bottle of champagne sat chilling in a silver bucket. They never knew what hit them, he said, a look of profound admiration in his eyes. It was a masterpiece, Alora. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city I now owned a significant piece of. I didn't feel like a victor. I felt empty. I had spent so long focused on the battle that I hadn't thought about what came after, what I would do with all this power. What's your first order of business, Madame Chairman? Julian asked gently. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a news alert from a major financial paper, the kind that now knew my name. I tapped it open. A photo of Isabel, her face tear-streaked and angry, being led into a police station, filled the screen. The headline was, "A Second Earthquake, on a Day Already Full of Them." Breaking: Isabel Devereaux detained in connection with insurance fraud scheme. Stolen winter diamonds recovered from private safe deposit box. I stared at the screen. The diamonds had never been stolen. Isabel had hidden them, planning to frame me and collect on the insurance policy. In their arrogant, clumsy attempt to ruin me, they had exposed their own rot, their own cheap, common criminality. My plan had worked better than I had ever dreamed. It had not only stripped them of their power, but it had forced their own corruption out into the light. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first genuine smile I'd felt in 18 months. The emptiness began to recede, replaced by a new, sharp sense of purpose. I turned from the window to face Julian. My first order of business, I said, my voice clear and strong. A full forensic audit of every transaction Devereaux and Sterling has made for the past 10 years. I held up the phone. It seems I wasn't the only fox in the henhouse, after all. My eyes went back to the city skyline, no longer seeing it as a symbol of what I had won, but as a territory to be explored. Let's find out what other jewels the Devereaux family has hidden away. The champagne bottle Julian had brought remained unopened. Victory, I was discovering, did not taste like sparkling wine. It tasted like the metallic temps of ozone after a lightning strike. The air in the penthouse suite was still charged with the energy of a world that had been fundamentally remade. The sun rose over Makati City, its light glinting off the steel and glass towers of the financial district. My new kingdom, my new battlefield. I had not slept. Instead, I had watched the news of my own story unfold online, a cascading series of headlines that painted a picture of a palace coup. The Devereaux dynasty had fallen, and I was the woman holding the sword. At 8:45 a.m., I walked out of the hotel elevator and into the private lobby of the Devereaux and Sterling Trust headquarters. The hushed, marble-clad space was electric with fear. Employees I had never seen before averted their eyes, whispering behind their hands. They were staring at a ghost who had become a queen. The emergency board meeting was held in the cavernous, mahogany-paneled room that had been Alistair's personal cathedral for 40 years. He was there. So were Genevieve and Tristan. They sat at the far end of the long table, a tight, isolated unit of obsolete power. They looked haggard, aged a decade overnight. The rest of the board, a collection of old men who had grown rich on Alistair's coattails, sat stiffly in their chairs, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I took my seat at the head of the table. Alistair's seat. I didn't feel a thing. I placed a single, slim folder in front of me. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and clear in the heavy silence. "Thank you for attending on such short notice. We can dispense with the pleasantries. As of 9:01 a.m. yesterday, I assumed a 68% controlling interest in this institution. The law is clear. The transfer is complete." I opened the folder. This document contains the pre-signed, undated resignations of every member of this board, which my predecessor, Mr. Devereux, unwisely required as a condition of their appointment. I slid the papers across the polished wood. I am formally accepting them now. Your time at Devereux and Sterling is over. Thank you for your service. A few of the old men sputtered, but a single, cold glance from Julian Vance, who stood behind me, silenced them. As for the executive offices, I continued, my gaze finally settling on my former family. Alistair Devereux, your position as chairman is terminated. Genevieve Devereux, your advisory role on the board of the bank's charitable foundation is dissolved. And Tristan, I looked at my husband, the man who had sat silently while they tried to send me to prison. Your position as vice president of marketing is redundant. I closed the folder. An interim board has been appointed. Security will assist you in collecting any personal belongings from your offices. You have until noon. It was over in less than 5 minutes. A dynasty, dismantled with a single, quiet statement. Later that morning, I met with the forensic accounting team I had engaged weeks ago. They were a pack of quiet, sharp-edged wolves, led by a woman with a reputation for finding skeletons in the most well-guarded corporate closets. Tear it apart, I told them, standing in Alistair's former office. A room so large it had its own climate. I want to know every secret, every hidden ledger, every bad loan used to prop up a friend's failing venture. I want to know where every single peso that is unaccounted for went. I want the institutional rot of this bank excised, starting from the very top. They nodded, their expressions grimly enthusiastic, and went to work. I was standing by the vast window, looking down at the river of traffic on Ayala Avenue, when a movement at the door caught my eye. It was Tristan. He had slipped past the new security detail, his face pale and strained. Elara, he said, his voice hesitant. Can we just talk? I turned to face him. There's nothing left to talk about. Tristan, please, he said, taking a step into the room. He looked lost, a ghost haunting his own past. I know what you think of me, but you have to understand, I was trapped. My whole life, they've controlled everything. What I studied, who I socialized with, who I married. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I did love you, Elara, in my own way. But I was weak. I was a coward. I know that. Yes, I said, my voice devoid of heat. You were. It was the simple, unadorned truth, and it hit him harder than any accusation would have. You weren't trapped, Tristan, I continued, my voice clinical, analytical. You were comfortable. You chose the comfort of their approval over the character it would have taken to defend your own wife. It was a simple transaction. And your choice is the only thing about you that has ever truly been your own. He flinched, the words finding their mark. What do you want from me? He whispered. That's the beautiful part, I said, turning back to the window. I want nothing from you at all. You are irrelevant. He stood there in the silence for a long moment before turning and walking away, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I had just told my husband he was irrelevant, and the only thing I felt was the quiet satisfaction of a problem being solved by late afternoon. The wolves returned. They had found something. Julian Vance laid the file on my new desk. It didn't take long, he said grimly. Alistair was arrogant and sloppy. I opened the file. Inside were loan documents, transfer slips, and corporate charters. They outlined a series of massive, non-performing loans funneled from Devereux and Sterling into a string of luxury resort developments down in Palawan, developments that had been failing for years. The loans had been continuously refinanced, rolling the debt over, hiding the losses. The resorts were all owned by a single holding company. Let me guess, I said, my voice dry. The holding company is registered in the British Virgin Islands, Julian confirmed, but its sole director is a man who shares a birthday and a mother's maiden name with Alistair Devereux. He's been using the bank as his personal piggy bank, siphoning capital to cover his disastrous personal investments. This isn't just unethical, Elara. It's bank fraud. It's a federal crime. There's enough here to send him to prison for the next 20 years. I stared at the documents, the proof of a crime far more significant than the petty theft of a few diamonds. This was the rot at the core of their name. I now held the power not just to take Alistair's company, but to take his freedom. The private line on my desk, the one that had belonged to Alistair, buzzed. I hesitated, then pressed the speaker button. Yes, Madam Chairman. My new assistant's voice came through. I have a Miss Genevieve Devereaux on the line. She insists on speaking with you. I nodded to Julian. He stood silently as I accepted the call. Ilara Genevieve's voice said. It was not the hysterical shriek from the courthouse. It was not the icy condescension from 100 family dinners. It was a new voice, cold, toneless, and pragmatic. The voice of a monarch whose kingdom is on fire, negotiating the terms of surrender. You have made your point with remarkable clarity, she said. Alistair is a fool, and Isabel is a disgrace. But you and I are not sentimentalists. You have the bank. What you do not have is a clean slate. I'm not sure I understand, I said, my hand resting on the file containing the proof of her husband's crimes. Oh, I think you do, she replied, a hint of steel in her voice. You have your victory. But a protracted legal battle with Alistair, the public disgrace of a trial. It will taint the Devereaux and Sterling name, your name, now. It will damage the asset you just fought so hard to acquire. She paused. I believe it is time you and I had a private discussion about the terms of a peaceful transition. I looked at Julian. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Genevieve wasn't pleading. She was proposing a treaty. She was a queen suing for peace, but a queen who still believed she had a few pieces left on the board. What could she possibly offer me that I hadn't already taken? What could she possibly threaten me with? Where and when? I asked. My home, she said. Tonight. Come alone. The drive from Makati to the Devereaux estate felt like moving backward in time. The sleek, modern towers of my new life gave way to the old, sprawling mansions of Forbes Park, their high walls and ancient acacia trees whispering of dynastic power and generational secrets. The last time I had made this drive, I was a suspect, a wife on the verge of being discarded. Tonight, I was a conqueror, summoned to the vanquished queen's throne room to discuss the terms of her surrender. Julian had been adamant. It's a trap, Ilara. Don't go alone. At least let me wait in the car. I had refused. This isn't a legal negotiation, Julian. This is personal. She knows that, and she knows I know that. This is between me and her. I did, however, take the slim file detailing Alistair's fraud. A queen does not go to a parley unarmed. The gates to the estate swung open without my driver needing to announce us. They were expecting me. The grounds were dark, the house looming like a brilliantly lit mausoleum. A servant I didn't recognize opened the door, his gaze respectfully averted. The house was silent. The portraits of Devereaux ancestors lining the grand hallway seemed to watch me with newfound apprehension. Genevieve was not in the formal drawing room. The servant led me through the house to the Glaston Conservatory at the back. A humid, fragrant room filled with exotic orchids. She sat in a white wicker chair, a porcelain teacup resting in her lap, looking for all the world like a gracious hostess at a garden party. Alistair and Tristan were nowhere to be seen. This was her court, and she was granting me a private audience. Ilara, she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Thank you for coming. Tea? No, thank you, Genevieve, I said, taking the seat. I would not accept her hospitality. I would not pretend this was a social call. She gave a small, knowing nod. Very well. Let us not waste time on pleasantries. She set her teacup aside, her movements precise and deliberate. You have won, a stunning, if rather brutal, victory. The bank is yours. My daughter is a fool who will likely see the inside of a prison cell. My husband has been rendered impotent, and my son has been revealed as the profound disappointment. I always knew him to be. Her candor was a weapon, designed to disarm me, to reposition her as a pragmatic realist. I did not react. However, she continued, her sharp eyes fixed on mine. Your victory is not as clean as you imagine. The market dislikes instability. The moment word of Alistair's mismanagement becomes public, there will be a run on the bank. The old families who form the bedrock of our client base will pull their assets. Your new kingdom will be built on a foundation of ash. You are the chairman of a damaged brand. A brand I am more than capable of rebuilding, I said coolly. Perhaps, she conceded, but why engage in a long, painful, and public war when a swift, clean peace is an option? She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. I am prepared to offer you that peace, Ilara, in exchange for what? My silence, she said. And my husband's, and my son's. You agree not to pursue Alistair for his financial crimes. You let him retire in disgrace, but not in a jail cell. In return, we disappear. We move to Europe. We release a public statement endorsing your new leadership, citing Alistair's failing health. We instruct our friends, our network, the bank's oldest and wealthiest clients, that their money is safe with you, that you are the future." She smiled, a thin, humorless line. "I will hand you the loyalty of our world on a silver platter. You will have your kingdom, whole and untarnished." It was a tempting offer, a golden bridge allowing my enemy to retreat, leaving the entire field to me. It was the sensible, pragmatic business decision. But she had made a critical error in her calculations. She assumed this was about business. "You seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation, Genevieve," I said, my voice quiet. "It is not." I placed the file I had brought on the small glass table between us. "Your family conspired to ruin my life, to have me caged like an animal. Your husband's crimes put the savings of thousands of ordinary people at risk to cover his losses on a few failed resorts in Palawan. This is not about the bank's reputation. This is about a debt, and it will be paid." Her composure flickered. Just for a second, I saw a flash of the snarling fury from the courthouse hallway. She had misjudged me. "I will agree not to personally deliver this file to the federal authorities," I said, my voice cold and clear, "on one condition." She stared at me, her expression wary. "What condition?" "Alistair will make a full, public confession," I said, "but not to the bank fraud. The public doesn't understand bank fraud. They understand a family conspiracy." I leaned in, mirroring her earlier posture. "He will confess that he and Isabel conspired together to frame me for the theft of the winter diamonds. He will claim it was his idea, that he manipulated his emotionally fragile daughter. He will take the full blame for her crime, exonerating my name completely and publicly. He will plead guilty to perjury, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. He will go to prison in her place." This was my checkmate. I was giving her a choice, her husband or her daughter, her king or her pawn. But either way, a Devereux would fall, and my name would be cleared by their own admission. She would save the family from the public shame of bank fraud, but at the cost of sacrificing her husband to the lesser, more sordid crime. Genevieve stared at me, her face a mask of stone. I had expected her to argue, to bargain. Instead, a slow, strange smile touched her lips. It was the most terrifying expression I had ever seen. "I see," she said softly. "You do not want our money. You want our name. You want to see a Devereux humbled." She picked up her teacup again, her hand perfectly steady. "My husband is a proud man, Ilara. He is also a very foolish one. But he would rather burn in hell than admit to a crime so common, so pathetic. He would see it as a stain on his legacy." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. "You see, you have the company file, but you do not have the family file." She reached into a drawer in the small wicker table and retrieved a single, old, yellowed piece of paper. It was a newspaper clipping, laminated and preserved. She slid it across the table to me. The headline was from over 30 years ago. "Shipping magnate dies in tragic boating accident." The man's name was Miguel Intwill, a name I recognized as one of the Devereux's fiercest business rivals in the 1980s. A man who had tried to execute his own hostile takeover of their bank, a man whose sudden death had ceded the entire field to Alistair. "Mr. Enriel was an excellent swimmer," Genevieve said, her voice a placid, conversational murmur. "A tragic loss. He was a man who, like you, underestimated our family's commitment to protecting its assets. It was not a memory. It was a threat. A quiet, elegant, and utterly chilling threat. She wasn't negotiating with her assets anymore. She was showing me the contents of the family crypt. She was telling me that even though I had won, even though I held all the cards, there were other games to be played, games with different rules. "You have your bank, Ilara," she said, her eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky. "I suggest you enjoy it." She stood up, smoothing the front of her silk dress. The audience was over. "Do be careful on your drive home. The roads can be so unpredictable at night." The scent of decaying orchids filled the air, a sweet, cloying perfume that I would forever associate with the face of polite, civilized evil. Genevieve's final words, a delicate thread of silk wrapped around a shard of glass, hung between us. It was a masterful move. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened me directly. She had simply opened the door to the family crypt and shown me the ghosts inside. My own smile felt brittle, but I held it in place. I met her cold, expectant gaze, The roads can be unpredictable. I agreed softly, my voice a perfect mirror of her own calm. I leaned forward and gently pushed the yellowed newspaper clipping back across the table toward her. But one of the first things I did upon assuming control of the bank's assets was to review and triple the personal security detail for all senior executives. That includes me, of course. I let the lie settle between us. I hadn't done that yet, but she didn't know that. They are very good, special forces. They tend to notice unpredictable things. I stood, smoothing the front of my dress. Thank you for the tea, Genevieve. It's been illuminating. I turned and walked out of the conservatory, through the silent, cavernous house, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors. I did not rush. I did not look back. I felt her eyes on me the entire time, a cold, calculating pressure. I was a piece on the board she was re-evaluating, a variable she had not yet solved. The moment the heavy front door closed behind me and I was inside the armored cocoon of the car, the mask dropped. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird, a single bead of cold sweat, traced a path down my temple. The threat had been real. It had been delivered with the casual confidence of a woman who had seen such things before. My first call was to Julian. She threatened me, I said, my voice low and tight. I recounted the conversation, the newspaper clipping, the story of the drowned rival. The silence on his end was heavy. Julian was a man of contracts and corporations. This was something else entirely. Ilara, he said, his voice strained. This changes the calculus. This is no longer a corporate battle. I'm calling in a risk management team. The best. We need to secure you, your residence, your office. Now, do it, I said. The freedom I had won felt suddenly fragile, a thin pane of glass that could be shattered at any moment. The Devereaux had lost the war, so they were changing the rules of engagement. By the time I arrived back at the penthouse, a new phase of my life had already begun. Two men, built like mountains in sharp, dark suits, met me in the private lobby. They introduced themselves as Mr. Reyes and Mr. Santos, the lead agents from a global security firm. They were polite, professional, and their eyes missed nothing. They swept my suite, my car, my new office, for listening devices. They mapped out my movements. They became my shadows. My power had bought me a gilded cage, and now my wealth was buying me gilded guards. The threat did not make me want to retreat. It made me want to attack. Genevieve had made a mistake. She had shown me her weapon, and in doing so, she had shown me where to aim. The next morning, I met with my forensic accounting team. The audit parameters have changed, I told them, my voice hard. Alistair's bank fraud is a symptom, not the disease. I want you to find the disease. I want you to look for the infrastructure of their power. Find the slush funds, the off-ledger payments. Look for discrete monthly transfers to private investigators, security consultants in a less reputable line of work, politicians, charities, anything that smells like it's not about banking. Genevieve mentioned a family file. I want you to recreate it. The hunt was on, not just for financial crimes, but for the network of influence and intimidation that had kept the Devereaux family untouchable for 50 years. Days turned into a week. I lived in a state of hypervigilance, surrounded by my security detail. I attended meetings, signed documents, and began the long, arduous process of restructuring the bank. I was the picture of a calm, powerful executive. But at night, alone in the vast penthouse, the fear would sometimes creep in. I would find myself looking at old photos on my phone. There was one of Tristan and me, taken on our honeymoon in El Nido. We were smiling, happy, a lifetime ago. The woman in that photo had believed in love, in safety, in a shared future. I felt a profound, aching pity for her. She had been so naive. I had won this war, but I had lost that woman forever. It was late on a Friday night when Mr. Reyes, the head of my security detail, requested an urgent, in-person meeting. He arrived at the penthouse, his face grim. We're done with the initial sweep and hardening of your environments, Miss Devereaux, he began, his tone all business. The good news is, you are now secure. And the bad news? I asked, my stomach tightening. The bad news is that you weren't before. He placed a small, black object on the polished surface of my coffee table. It was no bigger than a thumbnail, a sophisticated piece of listening technology. We found this in the base of the lamp on your new desk. At the office, he said. It's high-end, voice-activated. It's been active since the day you moved in. I stared at the bug. My blood ran cold. They had heard everything. Every confidential conversation with Julian. Every strategic discussion with the audit team. Every instruction I had given. They knew my entire game plan. We traced the signal from the device, Reyes continued, his voice level. The listening post, the receiver, wasn't located at the Devereaux estate, which was my first assumption. Where was it? I asked. He consulted his notes. The signal was being bounced to a secured device registered to a corporate suite on the 34th floor of the Sterling Tower. He looked up. Your building. My heart hammered in my chest. Whose suite? Reyes met my gaze, his expression unreadable. A shell corporation called TechRest Holdings. We did a quick search on the incorporation documents. There is only one name listed as the director and sole shareholder. He paused for a beat, letting the silence stretch before delivering the final, devastating blow. Tristan I sank back into my chair, the air leaving my lungs. Tristan, not Alistair, not Genevieve. Tristan, the broken, pathetic man I had dismissed as irrelevant. The coward. He hadn't been a ghost haunting his own past. He had been a spy, a snake, hiding in plain sight, right here in my own fortress. My pity for him curdled into a new, more dangerous kind of rage. His weakness, I realized, was the most dangerous weapon they had, and he had just aimed it directly at my heart. The discovery of the listening device didn't just change the game, it scorched the earth of the entire playing field. The betrayal was so profound, so intimate, it dwarfed everything else. The frame-up, the abandonment at trial, those were acts of war committed by an enemy. This was the work of a viper she had allowed to sleep in her own bed. Tristan, the sad, feckless ghost, was a far more dangerous foe than she had ever imagined. My fury was a silent, white-hot furnace. There was no screaming, no throwing things, just a terrifying, absolute calm. The last vestiges of the naive woman who had once loved him were incinerated in that moment. My first call was not to Julian, it was to Reyes. The bug in my office, I said, my voice as flat and hard as slate. Leave it. I want them to think they're still listening, ma'am, Reyes asked, a note of surprise in his professional tone. I'm initiating a counter-surveillance operation, Mr. Reyes. Your new priority is Tristan Devereaux. I want to know everything. Who he meets, who he calls, where he gets his coffee. I want a full workup on his shell corporation TechRest Holdings. I want to know every peso that moves in or out of it. You have the full financial and logistical resources of this bank at your disposal. I want you to be his shadow until you are more familiar to him than his own skin. Consider it done, Madam Chairman, he said, the surprise in his voice, replaced by a grim understanding. My next call was to Julian. The game has changed, I said, and proceeded to tell him about the bug, and about Tristan. That pathetic worm, Julian breathed, his professional composure cracking. For a moment, to think he had the spine for it. His spine is irrelevant. He's a delivery system for his mother's venom, I countered. But we're going to use it against them. We're staging a meeting. In my office. Tomorrow morning. You, me, and the head of the audit team. And we are going to feed them a story. The next morning, my office, the bugged, compromised space, was transformed into a stage. Julian and Maria, the lead forensic accountant, arrived. Their faces set with theatrical gravity. We knew our lines. We knew our audience was a single, traitorous man listening from the 34th floor. The preliminary audit is more alarming than we thought, Maria began, her voice pitched with professional concern, just loud enough to be picked up by the microphone in the lamp. Alistair's fraud is a mess, but it's contained. The real problem is deeper. What have you found? I asked, playing my part. A series of encrypted ledgers, hidden on a ghost server, she said, weaving the fiction we had created. It details a massive money laundering operation. The sums are staggering, but the names attached, they're not Devereaux, they're Russian, Bratva, I think. Very dangerous people. It looks like Alistair wasn't just covering his own losses, he was cleaning dirty money for the mob to keep the bank afloat. Julian slammed his hand on the table for effect. My God, if this gets out, the feds won't just take the bank, they'll classify it as a national security risk. And Alara, if these people think you're about to expose them. He let the threat hang in the air. Our priority is to contain this, I said firmly. We move the evidence of this other operation to a secure, off-site server. Deal with Alistair's personal fraud quietly and let this sleeping giant lie. It's too dangerous. We bury it. We continued the charade for another 20 minutes, painting a vivid picture of a threat so large it made the Devereux's crimes seem petty by comparison. We were giving Tristan a reason to believe the immediate danger to his father was about to be swept under the rug in favor of a much larger, more terrifying problem. We were offering him bait. After the meeting, I retreated into a quiet solitude. The revelation about Tristan had forced me to re-examine every memory, every shared intimacy. I scrolled through the photos on my phone until I found one from early in our marriage. We were at a small cafe in Sagada, the mountain air cool around us. I was laughing, caught off guard. I remembered that moment. I had just confided in him my deepest professional fear, that for all my skill with numbers, I was terrified of being outmaneuvered, of being made a fool of. He had taken my hand and told me, "That will never happen. I'll always be on your side." Looking at it now, the memory was obscene. He hadn't been my partner. He had been my student, learning my weaknesses, cataloging my fears for a future betrayal I never could have imagined. I deleted the photograph. The next 48 hours were a tense waiting game. Reyes and his team were a silent, efficient machine. They followed Tristan. They documented his movements. Then, on the second day, Reyes called. He took the bait, he said. He made a call from a burner phone immediately after your staged meeting. He arranged a meet, a quiet cafe in Legazpi village. 1 hour. I want a live feed, I said. Audio and video. I want to see who he's reporting to. We're already setting it up, ma'am. I sat in the command center we had established in a conference room, a bank of monitors in front of me. It felt like a movie, but the stakes were my life. One screen showed a long-lens shot of a table at the back of the cafe. Another showed schematics of the building. A third was ready for the audio feed. Tristan arrived first. He looked nervous, constantly checking his watch, wiping his palms on his trousers. He ordered a coffee he didn't touch. He was a terrible spy. Then, the bell above the cafe door jingled. A figure walked in. My breath caught in my throat. I expected to see Genevieve, her face a mask of cold triumph, or Alistair, coming to meet with his treacherous son. But it was neither of them. The person who walked purposefully toward Tristan's table was a woman. Her face was etched with a familiar concern, her movements imbued with a supportive warmth I knew so well. It was my friend, my staunchest ally, the woman who had held my hand and promised to sit in the front row of the courtroom every single day. My mind struggled to process the impossible image on the screen. My voice was a choked whisper, a sound of utter devastation. Clara. She sat down opposite Tristan, giving him a small, tight smile. The audio feed crackled to life. Did she buy it? Tristan asked, his voice low and urgent. Hook, line, and sinker, Clara replied, her voice the voice I had trusted implicitly, now a venomous thing. She thinks her biggest problem is the Russian mob. She's terrified. She's going to bury the evidence of your father's fraud to save herself. And you're sure she trusts you? Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound that made my blood run cold. Of course, she trusts me. Poor, sick, lonely, and please. All I've ever had to do was be her friend. She's so desperate for loyalty. She can't see the knife in her own hand. She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. Now, did you get what we discussed? The access codes to her personal accounts? My sources say she came into a significant inheritance. That's the real prize here, Tristan, not the bank, the new queen's personal treasury. I stared at the screen, my world tilting on its axis. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it was almost sublime in its perfection. My friend, my husband, working together. It wasn't a plot, this was something else. A second, secret conspiracy, hiding beneath the first dot, my carefully constructed world of power and control. My fortress of wealth and security had been built on a foundation of sand, and I had just discovered that the person I had trusted with the blueprints was the one holding the detonator. The world on the monitor was silent now. Tristan and Clara had finished their coffee, exchanged a look of conspiratorial triumph, and left the cafe separately. The long-lens camera feed switched to an exterior shot, showing Clara getting into a modest sedan and driving away, melting into the traffic of Legazpi village. The knife she had just plunged into my back was invisible. I stared at her face, frozen on the screen. The kind smile, the concerned eyes, the supportive tilt of her head. It was all a mask, a beautifully crafted, perfectly worn mask to hide the rot underneath. This was a betrayal so complete it defied reason. Genevieve and her family were hyenas, fighting for their piece of the kill. I understood that. This was different. Clara had been my sister, not by blood, but by choice. She had held my hand, dried my tears, and all the while, she had been sharpening her blade. A sound beside me, a sharp intake of breath, broke the spell. It was Julian Vance. He looked from the screen to me, his face pale with a lawyer's fury at being so completely deceived. My head of security, Reyes, remained impassive, but his eyes were hard as granite. He had seen this kind of human treachery before. I didn't cry. The capacity for that kind of hurt had been burned out of me. The pain was a cold, physical thing, a shard of ice lodging itself deep in my chest. I took a slow, deliberate breath, and another. I was compartmentalizing. I was analyzing. I was taking this new, devastating data and recalibrating the entire equation. Mr. Reyes, I said, my voice quiet, but a universe away from the choked whisper of a moment before. It was the voice of a chairman giving an order. Keep the surveillance active on both of them. I want to know if a single molecule of air moves between them, but under no circumstances are they to know we are aware. That bug in my office is now our most valuable asset. Understood, Madam Chairman, he said. Julian, I said, turning to my lawyer. Cancel my afternoon. I need to think. Alone, in the penthouse, with the skyline of Makati spread before me like a conquered map, I forced myself to walk through the memories of my friendship with Clara. I was looking for the tells. The signs. I had been too blind, too needy, to see. It came to me with the sickening clarity of hindsight. A memory from about a year ago. Tristan had just been particularly cruel, making a public joke at my expense at a family function. I had met Clara for drinks afterward, distraught. It was the first time I had ever mentioned my secret inheritance. I just feel so trapped. I had wept, like I have no power. You have more power than you think. She had cooed, her hand on my arm. That money your aunt left you, that's not just money, Alara. It's an escape hatch. It's your independence. She had then given me what seemed like shrewd, sisterly advice. She'd helped me set up a series of trusts and holding companies to protect it, to keep it insulated from the devil. She had introduced me to an independent financial advisor to help manage it. The advisor, I now realized with a cold sickness, must have been her pawn all along. She hadn't been helping me protect my fortune. She had been helping me organize it for her own eventual theft. She had seen my pain, and, instead of an opportunity for comfort, she had seen an opportunity for access. The cold shard of ice in my chest solidified into a diamond, hard, sharp, unbreakable. My plan to ruin the Devereaux felt almost quaint now, a simple business transaction. The plan for Tristan and Clara would be a work of art the next day. The performance began anew. I walked into my bugged office, my face a mask of carefully constructed anxiety. I made a frantic call to Julian. It's worse than we thought, I said, my voice trembling with practiced fear. The audit team found the main firewall for the encrypted ledgers, the Russian accounts. Julian, the names. They're not just mobsters, they're connected to their government. If they think I'm going to expose them, I'm dead. Stay calm, Ilara. Julian played his part perfectly. We'll handle it. No, I insisted, injecting a note of hysteria. I'm not waiting for them to find me. I'm moving my personal funds. All of them. I'm transferring everything to a private, non-extradition bank in Liechtenstein. I'm creating a new trust, something completely firewalled and anonymous. It's my only way out. I have to protect myself. I knew they were listening. I knew that the words personal funds and inheritance would be like a siren song to them. I was setting up a honeypot, a beautiful, glittering pot of digital gold, and I was going to watch them walk right into it. But a trap this exquisite needed one final, perfect touch. It needed an accomplice they would never suspect. That evening I drove back to the Devereaux estate. This time, I did not wait to be summoned. I walked up to the front door and announced myself. I'm here to see Genevieve. I found her in the same conservatory, tending to her orchids. She looked up as I entered, her expression one of wary curiosity. To what do I owe the pleasure of a second visit, Ilara? She asked, her voice laced with her signature brand of icy condescension. Have you come to reconsider my offer? Not exactly, I said. I placed a small, discreet audio recorder on the glass table between us and pressed play. Clara's voice filled the humid air. Poor, sick, lonely, Annalise. She's so desperate for loyalty. Then Tristan's did she buy it, then Clara's again. That's the real prize here, Tristan, not the bank. The new queen's personal treasury. I watched Genevieve's face as she listened. Her regal composure remained intact, but a subtle tightening around her eyes, a faint whitening of her knuckles as she gripped her gardening shears, told me everything. This was not news to her. No, not news. It was a confirmation of her son's ultimate, pathetic nature. He wasn't just a coward who had failed to protect his family's honor. He was a common thief conspiring with an outsider against his own bloodline. When the recording finished, I turned it off. It seems your son has been busy, I said quietly. He was not working to save your family, Genevieve. He was preparing to rob me, and was perfectly happy to let his father take the fall for a fictional Russian mob connection to do it. Genevieve stared at me, her expression unreadable. She had been outmaneuvered not just by me, but by her own useless son. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice a low whisper. I want your help, I said. I am setting a trap for your son and his partner. A digital trap that will lead them to commit wire fraud so blatant, so undeniable, that it will make Isabel's insurance scheme look like petty shoplifting. But to make the bait completely irresistible, I need it to be authenticated by a trusted Devereaux source. I need a transfer protocol from your family's private Swiss account, a protocol only you and Alistair have access to. I was asking her to hand me the keys to her family's most secret financial kingdom, to use against her own son. It was a monstrous request. It was an alliance with the devil. Genevieve was silent for a long time, her gaze distant, as if weighing the fates of worlds. She looked at me, her enemy, the woman who had taken everything. Then she seemed to look through me, at the legacy of the Devereaux name, a name now being dragged through the mud by the weakness and treachery of her own children. She rose from her chair and walked to a small antique writing desk in the corner of the room. She unlocked a drawer, removed a single sheet of paper, and walked back to the table. She slid it across to me. Her voice was as cold and quiet as the grave. He is not my son, she said. He is a liability to the family name, a stain to be removed. She met my eyes, and in their icy depths, I saw the reflection of my own ruthlessness. Burn him to the ground. My mind struggled to process the impossible image on the screen. My voice was a choked whisper, a sound of utter devastation. Clara. She sat down opposite Tristan, giving him a small, tight smile. The audio feed crackled to life. Did she buy it? Tristan asked, his voice low and urgent. Hook, line, and sinker, Clara replied, her voice the voice I had trusted implicitly, now a venomous thing. She thinks her biggest problem is the Russian mob. She's terrified. She's going to bury the evidence of your father's fraud to save herself. And you're sure she trusts you? Clara laughed, a short, bitter sound that made my blood run cold. Of course, she trusts me. Poor, sick, lonely Annalise. All I've ever had to do was be her friend. She's so desperate for loyalty. She can't see the knife in her own hand. She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. Now, did you get what we discussed? The access codes to her personal accounts? My sources say she came into a significant inheritance. That's the real prize here, Tristan, not the bank, the new queen's personal treasury. I stared at the screen, my world tilting on its axis. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it was almost sublime in its perfection. My friend, my husband, working together. It wasn't a plot, this was something else. A second, secret conspiracy, hiding beneath the first dot, my carefully constructed world of power and control. My fortress of wealth and security had been built on a foundation of sand, and I had just discovered that the person I had trusted with the blueprints was the one holding the detonator. The world on the monitor was silent now. Tristan and Clara had finished their coffee, exchanged a look of conspiratorial triumph, and left the cafe separately. The long-lens camera feed switched to an exterior shot, showing Clara getting into a modest sedan and driving away, melting into the traffic of Legatsby village. The knife she had just plunged into my back was invisible. I stared at her face, frozen on the screen. The kind smile, the concerned eyes, the supportive tilt of her head. It was all a mask, a beautifully crafted, perfectly worn mask to hide the rot underneath. This was a betrayal so complete it defied reason. Genevieve and her family were hyenas, fighting for their piece of the kill. I understood that. This was different. Clara had been my sister, not by blood, but by choice. She had held my hand, dried my tears, and all the while, she had been sharpening her blade. A sound beside me, a sharp intake of breath, broke the spell. It was Julian Vance. He looked from the screen to me, his face pale with a lawyer's fury at being so completely deceived. My head of security, Reyes, remained impassive, but his eyes were hard as granite. He had seen this kind of human treachery before. I didn't cry. The capacity for that kind of hurt had been burned out of me. The pain was a cold, physical thing, a shard of ice lodging itself deep in my chest. I took a slow, deliberate breath, and another. I was compartmentalizing. I was analyzing. I was taking this new, devastating data and recalibrating the entire equation. Mr. Reyes, I said, my voice quiet, but a universe away from the choked whisper of a moment before. It was the voice of a chairman giving an order. Keep the surveillance active on both of them. I want to know if a single molecule of air moves between them, but under no circumstances are they to know we are aware. That bug in my office is now our most valuable asset. Understood, Madam Chairman, he said. Julian, I said, turning to my lawyer. Cancel my afternoon. I need to think. Alone, in the penthouse, with the skyline of Makati spread before me like a conquered map, I forced myself to walk through the memories of my friendship with Clara. I was looking for the tells. The signs. I had been too blind, too needy, to see. It came to me with the sickening clarity of hindsight. A memory from about a year ago. Tristan had just been particularly cruel, making a public joke at my expense at a family function. I had met Clara for drinks afterward, distraught. It was the first time I had ever mentioned my secret inheritance. I just feel so trapped. I had wept, like I have no power. You have more power than you think. She had cooed, her hand on my arm. That money your aunt left you, that's not just money, Alara. It's an escape hatch. It's your independence. She had then given me what seemed like shrewd, sisterly advice. She'd helped me set up a series of trusts and holding companies to protect it, to keep it insulated from the devil. She had introduced me to an independent financial advisor to help manage it. The advisor, I now realized with a cold sickness, must have been her pawn all along. She hadn't been helping me protect my fortune. She had been helping me organize it for her own eventual theft. She had seen my pain, and, instead of an opportunity for comfort, she had seen an opportunity for access. The cold shard of ice in my chest solidified into a diamond, hard, sharp, unbreakable. My plan to ruin the Devereaux felt almost quaint now, a simple business transaction. The plan for Tristan and Clara would be a work of art the next day. The performance began anew. I walked into my bugged office, my face a mask of carefully constructed anxiety. I made a frantic call to Julian. It's worse than we thought, I said, my voice trembling with practiced fear. The audit team found the main firewall for the encrypted ledgers, the Russian accounts. Julian, the names. They're not just mobsters, they're connected to their government. If they think I'm going to expose them, I'm dead. Stay calm, Ilara. Julian played his part perfectly. We'll handle it. No, I insisted, injecting a note of hysteria. I'm not waiting for them to find me. I'm moving my personal funds. All of them. I'm transferring everything to a private, non-extradition bank in Liechtenstein. I'm creating a new trust, something completely firewalled and anonymous. It's my only way out. I have to protect myself. I knew they were listening. I knew that the words personal funds and inheritance would be like a siren song to them. I was setting up a honeypot, a beautiful, glittering pot of digital gold, and I was going to watch them walk right into it. But a trap this exquisite needed one final, perfect touch. It needed an accomplice they would never suspect. That evening I drove back to the Devereaux estate. This time, I did not wait to be summoned. I walked up to the front door and announced myself. I'm here to see Genevieve. I found her in the same conservatory, tending to her orchids. She looked up as I entered, her expression one of wary curiosity. To what do I owe the pleasure of a second visit, Ilara? She asked, her voice laced with her signature brand of icy condescension. Have you come to reconsider my offer? Not exactly, I said. I placed a small, discreet audio recorder on the glass table between us and pressed play. Clara's voice filled the humid air. Poor, sick, lonely, Annalise. She's so desperate for loyalty. Then Tristan's did, she buy it, then Clara's again. That's the real prize here, Tristan, not the bank. The new queen's personal treasury. I watched Genevieve's face as she listened. Her regal composure remained intact, but a subtle tightening around her eyes, a faint whitening of her knuckles as she gripped her gardening shears, told me everything. This was not news to her. No, not news. It was a confirmation of her son's ultimate, pathetic nature. He wasn't just a coward who had failed to protect his family's honor. He was a common thief conspiring with an outsider against his own bloodline. When the recording finished, I turned it off. It seems your son has been busy, I said quietly. He was not working to save your family, Genevieve. He was preparing to rob me, and was perfectly happy to let his father take the fall for a fictional Russian mob connection to do it. Genevieve stared at me, her expression unreadable. She had been outmaneuvered not just by me, but by her own useless son. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice a low whisper. I want your help, I said. I am setting a trap for your son and his partner. A digital trap that will lead them to commit wire fraud so blatant, so undeniable, that it will make Isabel's insurance scheme look like petty shoplifting. But to make the bait completely irresistible, I need it to be authenticated by a trusted Devereaux source. I need a transfer protocol from your family's private Swiss account, a protocol only you and Alistair have access to. I was asking her to hand me the keys to her family's most secret financial kingdom, to use against her own son. It was a monstrous request. It was an alliance with the devil. Genevieve was silent for a long time, her gaze distant, as if weighing the fates of worlds. She looked at me, her enemy, the woman who had taken everything. Then she seemed to look through me, at the legacy of the Devereaux name, a name now being dragged through the mud by the weakness and treachery of her own children. She rose from her chair and walked to a small antique writing desk in the corner of the room. She unlocked a drawer, removed a single sheet of paper, and walked back to the table. She slid it across to me. Her voice was as cold and quiet as the grave. He is not my son, she said. He is a liability to the family name, a stain to be removed. She met my eyes, and in their icy depths, I saw the reflection of my own ruthlessness. Burn him to the ground.